United States for a second time today, calling the democratically elected leader of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, a dictator. Words that are music to the ears of the actual dictator, Vladimir Putin, who sent his army and missiles into Ukraine.
A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered.
That's the president again for the second time today, calling Zelensky a dictator nearly 3 years into Russia's invasion, which, just as a reminder, looked like this.
And we are here at the Antonov Airport, which is about 25 kilometers, 50 miles or so out of the centre. These troops you can see over here, stand up, Lewis. These troops you can see over here, they are Russian airborne forces. They have taken this airport, not just, I've been to officials earlier, Ukrainian officials, and they're saying that the plan isn't just to surround the Ukrainian capital. They fear now that the plan is to take the capital, to decapitate the leadership of Ukraine and to replace that leadership with a pro-Russian government. That's what Ukrainian officials are telling us now they think is the Russian plan.
Matthew Chance reporting the coverage from the 24th of February 2022 as Russian troops on orders from Vladimir Putin rolled into Ukraine. A dictator launching a war of aggression that would become the biggest in Europe since another dictator invaded Poland in 1939, touching off the Second World War. Now, back then, the same as now, this country was divided over getting involved in European affairs. And in his fireside chat to the nation, President Roosevelt did not commit to defending Europe. What he did do, however, unlike today, was tell the simple truth about the war and who started it.
Until 4:30 o'clock this morning, I had hoped against hope that some miracle would prevent a devastating war in Europe and bring to an end the invasion of Poland by Germany.
Plain speaking from an American president nearly 86 years later, here's what the current president is doing, most recently tonight and earlier today in his equivalent of a fireside chat, social media. Quoting from President Trump now, "Think of it, a modestly successful comedian, Volodymyr Zelensky, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start, but a war that he, without the U.S. and Trump, will never be able to settle." And just yesterday, he flat out said Zelensky started the war. He said it in response to complaints from Kyiv about being frozen out of peace talks over its future.
I think I have the power to end this war. And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made the deal.
Should never have started it, he said. Neither Ukraine nor its president did start the war. Russia and Vladimir Putin did. The president continued today, writing, Zelensky admits that half of the money we sent him is missing. He refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. The president then calls him a, quote, dictator without elections, and warns that Zelensky, quote, better move fast or he is not going to have a country left. He did the same, as you just heard tonight. That thinly veiled threats aside, none of what he said about Zelensky, his polling, or the money is accurate. As for the polling, which the president has said was, quote, down, separately said, by the way, was down at 4% approval, as the president's words, that's just not true. According to a recent survey in Ukraine, 57% of Ukrainians trust Zelensky, 37% do not. His support has actually fluctuated in the 60s and 50s for about a year or so. The numbers are a drop from the 90% approval he got in the months following Russia's invasion back in 2022. As for the $350 billion figure, the Inspector General overseeing it puts the number at $130.1 billion obligated, of which $86.7 billion has actually been dispersed, and that includes Ukraine-related funding sent to countries other than Ukraine. Now, the allegation that President Zelensky admits that half the money is missing, that's just not true either. What he actually said to the Associated Press earlier this month was that although people talk about Ukraine getting as much as $200 billion in U.S. aid, Ukraine had only received about $76 billion. He then said, according to the translation by a Ukrainian news outlet, that he doesn't know where all the professed additional money has gone and that perhaps these higher figures are correct, quote, on paper, end quote, which is not the same as him saying the money is missing, let alone implying, as the president just did, that there's something shady going on. As for calling Zelensky a dictator for not holding elections, well, Britain's Winston Churchill didn't hold elections during the Second World War. And by the way, when the war was over and he was voted out of office, he did not try to overturn the outcome. As for Vladimir Putin, he's held elections, but they are a foregone conclusion. Here's a headline after his last one. Putin extends his rule after a predetermined vote. Indeed. What is incredible is that President Trump, the President of the United States, is now echoing talking points that Vladimir Putin has pushed repeatedly. Putin has called Zelensky's presidency illegitimate and said he should hold elections.
We're hearing that Russia wants to force Ukraine to hold new elections in order to sign any kind of a peace deal. Is that something that the U.S. would ever support?
Well, we have a situation where we haven't had elections in Ukraine, where we have martial law, essentially martial law in Ukraine. And yeah, I would say that, when they want a seat at the table, you could say the people wouldn't the people of Ukraine have to say, like, it's been a long time since we've had an election. That's not a Russia thing.
Well, keeping in mind, it's not an exclusively Russia thing, would be more accurate. Trump and Putin are on the same page on this. In any case, President Zelensky weighed in today about what President Trump is saying about him.
Unfortunately, President Trump, I have great respect for him as a leader of a nation that we have great respect for. The American people who always support us, unfortunately, lives in this disinformation space.
Well, he said that against the backdrop of two newspaper interviews with Vice President Vance, in which Vance warned Zelensky not to publicly criticize the president. Quoting him now in the Daily Mail, the idea that Zelensky is going to change the president's mind by bad-mouthing him in public media, everyone who knows the president will tell you that is an atrocious way to deal with this administration. In the meantime, even some Republican lawmakers appear uneasy with at least some aspects of the president's Ukraine position, though some, such as Senator Lisa Murkowski, fell back on the variations of the GOP mantra during the first Trump administration of, oh, I didn't see that tweet.
I would like to see that in context because I would certainly never refer to our President Zelensky as a dictator.
The president speaks for himself. What I want to see is a peaceful result, a peaceful outcome.
Make no mistake about it, that invasion was the responsibility of one human being on the face of this planet. It was Vladimir Putin.
Former Vice President Pence also weighed in, tweeting, quote, Mr. President, Ukraine did not start this war. Russia launched an unprovoked and brutal invasion claiming hundreds of thousands of lives. The road to peace must be built on the truth. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton called what the president said, quote, some of the most shameful remarks ever made by a U.S. president. And again, as you saw just a short time ago tonight, the president repeated those remarks. Joining us now is Massachusetts Democratic Congressman and Armed Service Committee member Seth Moulton. He visited Ukraine during the war. He's also a Marine combat veteran of the Iraq War. Congressman, what is your response to President Trump's comments on Ukraine's President Zelensky, calling him, among other things, a dictator?
You said it very well. I mean, he is echoing Putin's talking points. It's as if, to go back to your history lesson about President Roosevelt had started giving Hitler's talking points for invading Poland. Or if the president had blamed the United States for the attack on Pearl Harbor. This is truly unprecedented in American history. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous for our national security. Because if Trump goes around supporting our adversaries, supporting dictators who invade sovereign countries, then at some point they're going to invade countries with security guarantees from the U.S. and American troops are going to be fighting and dying.
There are those who support the president who argue this is some sort of three-dimensional chess, that he is just rebalancing the power in the world and the rest of us just don't understand the genius of what he's doing. What do you say to that? I mean, he does seem to be alienating our allies, all members of NATO, who we have alliances with, in favor of Vladimir Putin.
What I say to people who say that is stop lying. Because the mental gymnastics that you see Republicans undertaking to somehow justify the unjustifiable, to somehow justify literally supporting our enemies, which is the definition of treason, is amazing. I mean, I was at the Munich Security Conference this past weekend, And after events like the vice president's shameful, embarrassing speech to our European allies, the most hypocritical speech I've ever heard an American official give in my entire life, the Republican senators were doing these mental gymnastics to try to get out of criticizing the administration. Why, Anderson? Because they're scared. They're just scared of Trump. They're so scared of Trump, they can't present the truth to the American people.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see Lisa Murkowski saying, well, I need to see the context. I mean, you can look at the context all you want. It doesn't get any better.
No, there's no context for that.
And John Thune told CNN's Monteraju that there's no question that Russia is the aggressor here. Later, he told Fox that this is, quote, the back and forth that occurs in a situation like this where the stakes are really high. What leverage, if any, do congressional supporters of Ukraine, Republicans, I mean, I don't know if any Republicans would speak up, or Democrats alike, what can anybody in Congress do? I mean,
Well, actually, Congress could do a lot if Congress did its job, but Congress is run by Republicans right now who, again, are just scared of Trump. And so behind the scenes, Democrats like myself, especially those of us who do have good relationships with Republicans across the aisle, especially on national security committees like the Armed Services Committee, we're trying to convince our Republican allies to just have some courage, to say in public what they're saying in private, to say to the U.S. president what they said to our European allies over the weekend when they tried to reassure our allies, tried to strengthen NATO in the face of the Trump administration repeatedly undermining it.
Well, the other thing that's developing, I mean, according to a memo obtained by CNN, the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, has now ordered the military to prepare plans to make massive budget cuts, 8% cuts per year for the next 5 years. I mean, everything I heard while they were running was about raising money for the military, about improving the military. I think Hegseth had spoken just a few days ago. You're obviously a veteran. What do you believe? Does that make sense to, on the one hand, say we're going to be improving the military and you know, getting it ready, you know, fighting ready, and yet we're going to have these cuts?
Well, look, I've been a critic of Pentagon spending for a long time, and I think that the Pentagon could spend its money more efficiently. I think we should be investing in the modern, cheaper, smaller, nimble systems like drones and autonomous underwater vehicles, as opposed to the big, heavy, old things like tanks and aircraft carriers that cost a lot of money to build and take a lot of expensive people to operate. So I'll be the first to say that the Pentagon could modernize, could better meet today's threats, and probably save some money in the process. But let's be clear, that's not what's going on with this administration. This administration can't get out of its own way. Trump himself said that he wants to raise the Pentagon's budget by about $150 billion, and the very next day said he wants to cut the budget in half. The defense secretary says a different thing every day of the week. So they can't get out of their own way. They're contradicting themselves, and therefore they clearly, Anderson, they clearly have no plan to keep the country safe.
It's a terrifying thought to end on, but we're going to leave you there, Congressman Moulton. I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you. Joining us now is CNN senior political commentator David